Hey everybody, welcome to Off the Shelf Board Game Reviews. This video is part of a series covering my top 51 tabletop games of all time. In this video we're going to cover numbers 40 all the way down to 31. So let's get over the little wah 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 stuff and bring everything down to the table with number 41. Number 40 on the list is Edge of Darkness from AEG Games. Now this is a game that probably is going to keep me away from Kickstarter for a little while due to some of the problems I had with this specific thing and with AEG itself. Now of course everybody's going to ask what happened. Well, simply put, I backed the game and unfortunately the shipping ended up being a little more expensive than I was originally quoted, and instead of AEG contacting me and saying, hey, we need another $5 to cover the shipping, they took some stuff out of my pledge so I didn't get some of the things, which was I found kind of annoying. Not only that, you're looking at a game that did not have enough components to play the game as a 4-player game, and you have a little bit of problems with the game. Now, why am I mentioning these problems to begin with? I mention these problems because after all these frustrations, enough that would frustrate most gamers, this game is still in my top 51 tabletop games of all time because this is an extremely unique gaming experience that, well, there's Mystic Vale, but beyond Mystic Vale, you're really not going to see any games that are doing exactly what this game is doing. As a matter of fact, you're not going to find any games that are doing everything this game is doing, and that's one of the things I found so enjoyable about this game. So enough rambling. What exactly is Edge of Darkness? Edge of Darkness is a card crafting game. And what does that mean? Well, you're simply going to take a card and you're going to have a buying table out here where you're going to buy extra things, and you're going to use these things to add into your cards to make your cards more powerful as you play the game. So you may play some resources and buy an add-on to your card, and you're going to simply slot that into your card, and now this card is more powerful. So when this card comes back up, it's going to do all three of these things versus just the two things it did at the beginning. So you're basically crafting cards, making more powerful cards to do more powerful things, but there's some extra things that add onto the game that make it even better. The next thing that we have is we have what's called the Threat Tower. Now the Threat Tower is really cool. Well, towers are always fun with dice cubes and everything like that, but you're simply going to put cubes in a tower, and that's going to judge what kind of things are going to happen to the heroes, because that's the next cool thing about the game. Every single time you are building these cards, you are also creating monsters that are going to be attacking the cities every single time enough threat cubes get out on the board. And it's going to create simple weak monsters, or if you get really powerful cards, it's going to create really powerful monsters. So now you have two things you're basically fighting in this game. You're trying to make the awesome cards that are going to give you the better combinations, going to allow you to win the game by getting all the victory points. But as you're doing that, you're creating more powerful monsters that are going to be attacking the city. So you kind of have the cycle of how you're playing this game by you're wanting to get better cards, but you're also knowing that you're making more powerful monsters, so you got to raise up your defenses. And this is all mixed in with I'll call it a little bit of a worker placement game, because you're going to send your workers out to various locations to do various things. They're going to come back, give you other resources, or you're trying to work on getting money, gain victory points, and gain renown in the city to win the game. Now, I found the combination of all of these mechanics extremely awesome. If you explain the game, you're kind of looking at it and go, how the heck does all that work? But for some reason, it does. And all these things work together so fantastically to create an extremely enjoyable game that is varied every time you play, because, well, let's look at the Kickstarter. Every time you play the game, you're going to have 10 different locations out on the board. I think the Kickstarter comes with 50 different locations. So you're going to add in the variety of all those different combinations you can play there, 10 of 50. Obviously, you can see there's going to be a lot of variety just in that aspect alone. But the game plays all the way up to 4 players. You're going to have a lot of cool different abilities, different expansions added in more locations, and you're even having, well, let's call them scenarios that you can play throughout the game that align all these cards in different ways. And you're going to see how this game plays differently every time you play, and it make an extremely awesome game. That's Edge of Darkness, number 40 on my list. Number 39 on the list is Lisboa by Eagle and Griffin Games. Now, how do I explain this game in 30 seconds or less? Well, I can't. But I can give you a good idea of exactly what this game is, and I can let you know that every single game by Vital Lacerda he has ever designed is extremely thematic, and while he makes some extremely mechanically deep games, all the mechanics always fit the theme, always fit the way the game is designed. He is an extremely fantastic designer, and that is no exception with the game of Lisboa. Now, in the game of Lisboa, the players are trying to rebuild the city after the great disaster, the fire, the earthquakes, and the floods that destroyed the city. And that's going to be represented by these different cubes that are representing different things. Blue is water, brown is earthquakes, red is fire. And you're going to be removing these rubble cubes as you're trying to rebuild the city, as you're trying to work with a monarchy, while you're trying to work with the church in an effort to rebuild the city by trading and doing everything you can to become the biggest, best person who rebuilds the city and brings it back to its glory. Now, the game is absolutely fantastic. It's a Vital Lacerda design. He makes absolutely fantastic designs. I have never played a Vital Lacerda game that I do not like. But what you have on top of all that is you have Eagle Griffin, who has done some fantastic components designs to make this game even better. One of the cool things about the game is the player boards. They took the time to put little slots in every single one of these locations to make sure that your resources don't fall out and when somebody comes along and bumps the table. That's really, really cool. You're also going to notice a weird shape about this board right here, and the reason why it's done is because you're going to be adding underneath your board by sliding different things in, such as cards, and give you extra abilities, whether you're using your ships for shipping, while you're hiring the nobles, while you're working with the clergy, and again, that's going to interact with all your boards. And if you look on the back, these boards are designed to make sure that the cards slide in without damaging them at all, which is really, really cool, which is another nice, really cool touch that they did with this game. So, what do I want to say about Lisboa that is going to take me less than 4 minutes to say and is going to make any sense at all? Lisboa is a fantastic design. It makes sense. Every time you play the game Lisboa, well, let me backtrack a little bit here. When you're learning to play the game Lisboa, this game looks extremely intimidating. You look at the rule book and you're trying to figure out how to play the game, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm never going to figure out how to play this game. And then you put it on the table and Vital Lacerda's magic comes to the surface. And you see that while it looks confusing, it all makes sense. Everything you're doing in this game makes sense to create a fantastic city rebuilding, worker placement, resource management game that has got some fantastic designs, some fantastic components, and some fantastic replay built into a game that plays all the way up to 4 players, that also has a really cool solo mode. That is Lisboa by Vital Lacerda, and number 39 of my top 51 tabletop games of all time. Dropping from number 32 to number 38 is Zombie 15. Zombie 15 is probably the first and the only zombie game that actually gets your blood pumping, and that is what a zombie game really should do. It needs to get your adrenaline going, get your blood pumping, and get you anxious to play, and the game does that in absolute spades. So what is Zombie 15? Zombie 15 is a scenario-based game. Now there's up to 20 scenarios, 15 in the base box, but there's 5 more you download off the internet for free, so basically call it 20. And your objective is you are basically a teenager trying to survive the zombie apocalypse. Because for some reason, everybody over the age of 18 has turned to zombies, and you're just trying to survive through these various scenarios. All the scenarios are connected, and you can't go on to the next scenario until you beat the current scenario. And it's actually a super simple game to play. On your turn, you get a certain amount of actions, and those actions are movement, those actions are searching, which are going to allow you to find more things that you're going to, oops, wrong stack. More things, more items that you can add to the things that you can carry, because you can only carry so many items. And the main thing you're really looking for is you're looking for weapons. Now there's 2 kinds of weapons in this game. There's the loud weapons, such as guns, and then there's the quiet weapons, such as hockey sticks. But the big problem with the game is that each one of those weapons only has a certain amount of ammo when it comes to guns, or they break pretty easily when it comes to baseball bats. So you're constantly having to fight, trying to get through a scenario, trying to get to the end, whatever the end of the scenario may be, whether it's just escaping the city or finding a helicopter, whatever it happens to be, you're just trying to get through the scenario. And if you manage to get through it in 15 minutes, where the Zombie 15 part of it comes in, you're going to win the game. But here's the extra challenge of the game. Quiet weapons are great. They do a little bit of damage, but they take out the zombies without causing a lot of problems. Loud weapons do a lot of damage, but the problem is approximately every minute on the track, more zombies are going to be added onto the board based on how much noise you're having to make. So that is where the excitement of the game comes in, because you are trying to take your turn as absolutely fast as possible, so you're not the person whose current turn it is when the zombie horde is going to attack, because when the zombie horde attacks, it's going to go on the space of the current active player. So you're rushing as fast as you can, trying to go through the stack of cards as fast as you can, trying to get to the exit as fast as you can, because you need to make it out through the scenario. And oh, one final thing I forgot to mention, all of you need to make it through the scenario. So one of your compatriots falls due to the massive horde of zombies, you have to go back and rescue them. That is Zombie 15. Number 37, new to the list, is Warhammer Warcry from in the Age of Sigmar universe from Games Workshop. Now, Warhammer Warcry is a tabletop skirmish game, but it does a whole bunch of things that are new to the genre that makes this game less about the standard miniature wargaming and makes it a lot more fun for your average board gamer. Now, let's just ignore the fact that it is a Games Workshop game, so it is going to require you to pull out a little bit of glue, pull out some files, and spend about maybe about 5 or 6 hours to put the game together. But ignoring that fact for just a second, if you get past that and you want to take the time to do that, you have a really, really enjoyable tabletop skirmish game here that does some things that add a lot of fun and make this game a very quick playing game, which are two combinations that really strongly cement that it's number 37 of my top 51 tabletop games. Although, one quick caveat here, again, like I said in the prequel video, Warhammer Underworld's Beastgrave coming out may unseat Warhammer Warcry, so we'll see what happens when I do this video again in 2020. But what is Warcry? Warcry is a game where each single player is going to take their faction, and I think there's 14 different factions if you go out and buy all these little extra card packs right here that allows you to bring in the factions that currently exist in the game into the game. Or you can play with one of the 6 games that are specifically made for Warcry itself. And your objective in this game is you are basically trying to fight out over a battlefield during an objective. Now, what are your objective? That's the cool thing about this game, one of the first really, really cool things about the game. Every time you set this game, you're going to come to the table with your faction to the table. Your faction's preset, and you can spend points to build your faction, but yeah, let's ignore all that stuff. Let's go to the really cool parts. Every single time you play this game, you're going to build a battlefield based on 4 sets of cards. Your first set of cards is going to tell you how you're going to lay out the battlefield itself with all the terrain that comes with the game. And yes, there's a lot more terrain than what I have here. I just don't want to show you my horrible paint jobs because I'm still working on painting them. The next thing, after you figure out your tabletop, next thing you're going to do is you're going to draw a card to figure out the initiative, where the heroes are going to come on the board, and also when your heroes are going to come onto the board. Because before you do anything, you're going to break your army down into 3 distinct groups, and you're not going to know when you're going to bring your groups onto the table, so you have to agonize every time you play the game of, okay, do I want my leader part of the shield or want my leader part of the hammer? Okay, if I put my leader part of the dagger, well, what if the dagger doesn't come first? Oh man, so you have a lot of strategy that you have to figure out then. Then the next thing you're going to figure out is you're going to try to figure out exactly what you need to do to gain victory in the game. And again, look at all those cards and see that all of them give different victory conditions. And then finally, you're going to add a twist onto the game, which is going to make the game play just a little bit differently every single time you play the game. So what you're looking at here is probably a million, well, I'm not going to do the math, I'm just going to give you a really cool number, at least a million different ways to play this game. Just from the cards alone, add in the fact that you're going to have terrain that is very interactive, and this game feels super, super thematic. Now, of course, the game is one of the standard games that's going to use a measuring tape. We're going to have to measure out movements, and I highly suggest you get one of those plastic measurers. They're a heck of a lot better. You can get one from Games Workshop directly. They're about 20 bucks, so I'd actually go get one of the ones from Litco. I think they work a heck of a lot better, and they're also cheaper. You can get them for about 8 bucks. Or you can go with the old standard measuring tape. But basically, every piece of terrain in this game is more than just there for looks, because you're going to interact with the terrain. You can use the terrain for cover. You can climb on top of the terrain. There's one faction here that actually has the ability of flight, which is very, very cool. They can fly around the board and do different things and attack each other. So you're looking at an extremely dynamic game that actually feels almost like a fantasy movie. You know those things from Lord of the Rings where everybody's attacking, but they focus in on the little individual fights, more like when Legolas was fighting off the orcs and everything like that. This game feels that dynamic because you're going to be moving your warriors around, trying to get the best positioning, trying to go from everywhere. And now some of these factions have flight, some of these factions have range attack, some of these factions are really good at close combat. They all play really differently, and the game just keeps an extremely cinematic feel. And the final thing that's really cool about it is it plays in about 45 minutes. You can literally, if you have all the pieces out of the box and just off to the side, you can literally pull out your 4 cards and probably have the game set up in about 5 minutes and play an entire game in probably about 40 minutes. So from setup to finish is about a 45-minute game. And the game is extremely enjoyable that entire time as a cool cinematic game, as a cool warba game, and also as a very, very cool campaign-based game, because there are actual full campaigns in the rulebook. And don't be intimidated by the thickness of the rulebook. The actual rules of the game are, I think they're only like 7 or 8 pages. The rest of this is all just your typical Games Workshop fluff, and then a whole big section on scenarios. I mean, you can look at all these scenarios. Those are all different scenarios. And then it also tells you how to play campaign play where your little faction is going to go through a total of 12 different missions trying to become the ultimate faction in this warscape in Warhammer Warcry number 37. Number 36 and dropping down from 20. Now don't think that means anything. You'll see exactly why that happened when we get to number 2 on the list, and I'll explain at that point. But number 36 on the list is Legends of Endor. Now Legends of Endor, when I'm talking about the game Legends of Endor itself, I'm actually talking about the entire system that you see right here. I don't think that this game, if there was just the very base box which handles missions 1 through 5, was the only thing that ever came out with it. Actually, I'm going to correct myself. I know for a fact that that is all we're ever talking about with this game would not be in my top 51 games of all time. So when I am talking about Legends of Endor, I am talking about the entire game system. And as you see, I got it all because the game is that darn good. Now, what is Legends of Endor? Legends of Endor is a story-based game. It's not a campaign game because everything you do on each individual story mission does not carry over at all. You're basically going to do each individual mission or each individual story. And I think there's up to, somebody's going to correct me, I think it goes up to 20 now. I know there's some fan missions out there that you can download and some other things, but I think it's numbered up to 20 or maybe even 22 now. Somebody correct me down in the comments below and keep me straight on that one. I greatly appreciate it. But what the idea of the game is this takes the idea of a game or a story such as Lord of the Rings, where the heroes are tragically outnumbered. And it's not about a typical RPG, Dungeons and Dragons type of scenario where you have 1 hero, 2 heroes, or 3 heroes who are mighty, unstoppable heroes who cut down swathes of ogres and orcs and goblins and everything like that. No, this is much, much more like the Lord of the Rings, where 1 mighty troll is enough to wipe out an entire party of heroes. Not only that, the idea of the game is not to take out the bad guys. The idea of the game is to take out the entire story requirements before the narrator, which tells the entire story, reaches the end of the track and our heroes fail the game. Because lots of interesting mechanics go into this game, and I like to give a huge, huge thumbs up to the person who is the designer and the artist, and the person who brings out the expansions of the game is one person. He's done a phenomenal job with this series. I hope he continues making stories in the world, and Michael Menzel, if you're out there listening and if you're watching my video, please make more stories. We love this game. But the cool thing about this game is the more of the bad guys you take out, the more your time runs out in this game. So while you may be able to get a whole party of heroes together to take out 1 single troll, you need to estimate and guess, is that 1 single fight going to be worth losing the game over the time frame? But the game has a constant time pressure because at the end of every single day, the bad guys are going to march on towards the city. And enough of the bad guys make it to the capital city based on the amount of players, anywhere up to 6 players, because this game does play up to 6 with the expansions. But if enough of the bad guys make it to the city based on the amount of players playing the game, our heroes, no matter how far along they are in the story, are going to lose the story. But again, you can't just go out there and just start attacking all the bad guys, because every time you kill one of these bad guys, the narrator, the timer, is going to march on towards letter N. And if it gets to N, you lose. If the castle is defeated, you lose. Oh, and finally, there's also going to be one big baddie who's also going to do everything in the power to make you lose the game. Whether it happens to be a giant kraken, which is going through and destroying the bridges, making it so you can't get across the city, whether it's a giant dragon, whether it happens to be an army of trolls that are pushing a giant siege engine towards the castle, whether it happens to be, well, I don't want to give away too many of the stories because there are tons and tons of stories in this game. Now, I am freely willing to admit that this game is a lot about mathematics, hedging your bets, and guesstimating if 1 single action is going to be worth repercussions you're going to have to suffer. Because many, many times I have played this game and I've gotten to the end of the game and I've looked over at all my friends and said, you know what? We literally won based on that 1 decision, or we literally lost this entire game based on 1 decision we made. And I know that can frustrate some players, but the stories, the extremely awesome design of this game, and how every one of these stories goes together just creates a fantastic story. Now, I do want to give one little caveat, just to accentuate a point I mentioned earlier. I know I said that games that have finite replay are never going to be on my top 51 games of all time. And the reason why this game does make it on my list is because it has the replayability of the Star Shield expansion, which allows you to play this game many, many, many times and play the game differently every single time you play it. Because when it comes to the Star Shield, every single time you play the game, you're going to pick all the cards that have the same number on it, and you're going to pick one of those cards only to make up your story. So for example, you may see that there are 5 cards that have A2 on it, you're only going to pick one, and you're not going to know which one of those cards you're going to pick until you get to that part of the story. When it comes to the A3 cards, you're going to go through all 5 of these cards, pick only one of them, the rest of them are going to move from the game, and that's going to be part of your storyline. And the game is played as a storyline as you go through all of these letters before you get to letter N and win the game. And that creates so much replay value, and so many challenges in the game to ensure that every single time you play the game, while you may be going out there to find the witch to save the prince, the ending of the story is going to be different. Whether you're worried about the troll engines that are coming to siege the castle, the gameplay is going to be different. Or if the dragon's going to come lay waste to all the land, the game is going to play different. That is this wonderful, wonderful game, Legends of Endor, number 36. Number 35 on the list, and actually going up 5 points from number 40, is Core Worlds from Stronghold Games. And when I'm talking about Core Worlds, I am talking about the game with the very first expansion, which I consider a mandatory purchase for the game. I think I actually mentioned in my review and explained more on details on that, so I'm not going to bore you with the details. But when I'm talking about Core Worlds, I'm definitely talking about Core Worlds with the Galactic Orders expansion. Now, what exactly is Core Worlds? Core Worlds is a tableau building game where at the start of every single game, every single player is going to pick one deck of cards that represents their faction. Now, every one of these factions is asymmetric because you have one special card in your deck that nobody else has that represents the leader of your empire, which gives you extra special powers. And what you are doing is you're going to play the game over 10 phases, and every single phase is going to be broken down into 2 separate action rounds, which is going to be associated with one specific deck of cards. So in the first round of the game and the second round of the game, you're dealing with all the cards in this deck, which is the worlds you can conquer, the units you can purchase, extra upgrades, extra special action cards you can do, and event cards that are going to come up. And then in rounds 3 and 4, you can get the next deck of cards, which has slightly more powerful worlds, slightly more powerful units, slightly more powerful events, and then you can move on to the third set of rounds, which is rounds 5 and 6, where you're going to get more powerful units, more powerful actions, but now the events are going to start being negative, creating more challenges for you. And that's going to go all the way on until you get the final 2 rounds, rounds 9 and 10, where your final objective is to be powerful enough to take out the Core Worlds represented on the top of every single player's board. And that's going to give you how you're going to get all your victory points in the game, because this is a victory point based tableau building game that plays up to 5 players. Now, there are so many reasons why I enjoy this game. This game plays differently every single time you play the game, because even with all these cards you're going to see right here, you're never going to use all these cards every time you play a game. It's not going to happen. It's literally impossible to use all these cards every time you play. So you're going to have a different game every time you play it. But the game is smartly designed because every single round you have to have a minimum amount of worlds to conquer, you have to have a minimum amount of units on the board, and that ensures that you have that out on the tableau for everybody to buy. So the game plays really interesting because you have a certain amount of actions and you have a certain amount of energy every single round, and every single thing that you do takes a certain amount of energy. So the game is a constant balance, because while one action is an action and you got X amount of actions, some actions cost multiple points of energy. So while you may spend one action to do an action that costs only 1 energy, and that's good use of your actions and your energy, in later rounds you're going to start using actions that may use 5, 6, or maybe 7 points of energy. And then you have this constant balance. Well, if you burn through all your actions but you still have energy left, you wasted your energy. If you burn through all your energy, but you still have actions left, you wasted all your action, because you need both of those resources to buy all these cards. So you're constantly agonizing about how you're going to spend your actions, your energy. You're constantly agonizing about getting the cards that are out on the tableau before the other players. And you're constantly agonizing about building a big enough fleet, because by the time you get to the end of the game in rounds 9 and 10, your ultimate objective is to take out the Core Worlds, which are worth the most amount of victory points in the game. Now, the reason why I say that this game is mandatory to get the expansion is because it comes with the factions, which give you extra special powers that you can use at any time. Basically, you're going to use one of your faction tokens, and anytime you play a card that represents one of the factions, you're going to throw one of your faction tokens on one of those cards. Now, these cards are a double-edged sword. If you use them, you get some cool abilities. If you don't use them, though, you're going to gain some extra victory points at the end of the game. So you have another double-edged sword there of, if I use this special ability, I'm going to gain some extra energy this round. But if I don't use it, it might be worth 5 victory points to me at the end of the game. So now I need to figure out what I want to do. Core Worlds is an extremely fantastic game. I personally think it's Andrew Park's best design, although to be fair, I've not played his newest dungeon game, which is kind of a dungeon crawling game with plays up to, I think, 4 players, that I actually really want to play a lot. Unfortunately, it's available only through Kickstarter. I missed the Kickstarter, so I can't get the game, but I am going to say, aside from knowing that game, I think this is Andrew Park's absolute #1 game he's ever designed, and it's also number 35 in my top 51 tabletop games of all time. Number 34, and new to the list, is Thunderstone Quest from AEG Games. Now, Thunderstone Quest is actually basically let's call it a 3rd edition of a game that's been around for many, many years. The original game was Thunderstone, then came Thunderstone Advanced, and then came Thunderstone Quest. And quite honestly, I probably never would have bought Thunderstone Quest except for the fact that I finally actually got to see the game played and realized that it was more than just a 3rd edition of the basic game, which is what made me finally drop down my cash for the game and pick it up. And I am extremely happy I did, because what they have done is they've taken Thunderstone Quest, which, let's be honest, Thunderstone, the original Thunderstone, came around from the simple fact that somebody basically looked at Dominion and said, okay, we have a dry game here, let's add some theme to it, and that's what came out of Thunderstone. Then that was remade into a 2nd edition, which became Thunderstone Advanced, and now we finally have Thunderstone Quest, which is really pretty much its own game at this time, and I cannot be happier with the final results. If you've never played Thunderstone, basically what you have here is you have a deck building game. Every single player is going to start with a deck of cards, and you can use this deck of cards to do various things, but the cool thing about this game is it's more than just a card game. It's also a board game at the same time, because you're going to use your deck of cards and your little hero that represents yourself leading your party of heroes to go out to a village or go into a dungeon and go deeper in a dungeon and fighting various creatures. And you can play this game by playing the quest, or you can just play as a standalone game, or you can play the epic variant, which allows you to just go versus a whole bunch of different creatures. Now, the really interesting thing about the game is just how the theme of the game itself works. Because instead of just having a dry deck building game where every single turn you're going to look at your hand of your cards, look at a buy pile, pick up a card, add it to your card, discard some cards, and do it over again until you get the most victory points, the game has a really good theme to it, and the theme is actually what is one of the really great things about the game. See, in Thunderstone Quest, you are basically, well, the best way I like to describe is you're basically a wizard who leads a party. And the reason why I do that is because you buy spells in this game, and only you get to use the spells, so obviously you're a wizard, and you're going to hire fighters, clerics, thieves, and other wizards, so obviously you're leading a party. And like I said, you're going to go into a dungeon, and you're going to play cards to defeat these bad guys inside these dungeons. Once a certain amount of bad guys have been defeated, you're going to start discovering things called Thunderstone Shards. Once you find a certain amount of Thunderstone Shards agreed upon before you start playing the game, or you can use the suggested amount in the rules, you're basically going to reveal the final boss. And everybody's going to get one final round where they're going to go ahead and attack the final boss. They're going to add up all their victory points, and you're going to figure out who the grand victor of the game is by having the best party, the best spells, the best gear, and also the most amount of experience from killing all the bad guys. Now, I enjoy Thunderstone Quest a lot, to the point that I've actually put my old version of Thunderstone in storage, and I'm probably just going to sell it one of these days because I'm never going to play it again, which is something that really, really shocked me. See, like I said, when Thunderstone Quest originally came out, I kind of looked at it and said, okay, I remember Thunderstone. I remember Thunderstone Advance, and there wasn't that much of a change between the two games, so why bother with Thunderstone Quest? And I really couldn't have been further from the truth here, because the additional effects of having the board and having the dungeon to go into just adds so much more to the game and creates a better game that definitely cements this as a game that's going to stay in my top 51 games of all time. Number 33, and new to the list, is Role Player. And specifically when I'm talking about Role Player, I'm talking about with the first expansion. Because if I were to be really, really honest, if I would take Role Player, just the basic game without the expansion, I would probably drop it from the list, and I'd probably replace this with Sagrada with the expansions. But since I do have the Role Player expansion, I'm definitely going to say this is my strong number 33. Now, what is Role Player? Well, Role Player kind of tickles my RPG geek funny bone very, very strongly, because in Role Player, you're going to create a, well, let's just call it a D&D character, because looking at Strength, Dex, Constitution, Intelligence, Wisdom, and Charisma, well, those are all the stats from Dungeons & Dragons. So you guessed it, you're going to create a Dungeons & Dragons character. Now, you may not play Dungeons & Dragons, or maybe you will. Who knows? Maybe you're looking for a new way to create your next character for your next campaign, and maybe you can do that. But what you're going to be doing in this game is a dice game and a deck construction game and a character generation system if you want to have a little bit of fun. On every single turn, one person is going to reach into a bag based on the amount of players, and you're going to pull out some dice, you're going to roll them, and these are going to be the starting stats. Oops, I can't count apparently today. And you're going to put these stats out on the board, and the player's going to compete to try to buy these stats. And they're going to use these stats to increase their player abilities, because what they're trying to do is they're trying to match up, trying to make the best wizard. They're trying to match their best abilities. They're trying to go out there and defeat certain bad guys, and they're trying to get experience to become the best hero at the end of the game. The game is going to come to an end once one of the players or all the players manage to fill in all their stats, and then they're going to figure out the victory points based on how well they made the perfect version of their character. Now, this game is tons of fun. It's a dice building game, which normally is not a game style that I enjoy, but this game has done it so fantastically to make a dice game that I have tons of fun with, tons of replay, and it's a very fantastic game. That is Role Player number 33. Number 32, and new to the list, is Inish. Now, Inish is part of what I like to describe as a trilogy of games. You have Inish, or Innis, however you want to pronounce it. You have Cyclades, or Cyclades, or Cyclades, or however you want to pronounce it. I'm going to cover all the methods just to prevent an argument here. And then finally, you get Kemet. Now, every one of these games are all part of what I like to consider a trilogy of dudes on a map war games. But every one of these games approaches the mechanic of the war game in just a little bit different way. And Inish does an interesting approach that makes it a number 32 on my list of top games. Because Inish, unlike a lot of these war games where you're going to be slinging tons of dice at each other to resolve everything, there are no dice in the game. Everything in this game is resolved from cards. Whether it happens to be your action cards, whether it happens to be your advanced cards, or whether it happens to be your epic tale cards. And the way you're going to get these cards at the start of every single round, you're going to divvy up the action cards to all the players, but it's going to be like an auction system, so you don't quite know which cards your other players have. Well, you know what cards you have, but you don't know which one of your opponents have which of the cards, and every one of these cards has special abilities. Next up, you're going to have the cards that you can get from controlling special locations, and whoever controls the location is going to get a card based on locations, give them extra powers, and then plus you get the epic cards, which are going to be giving you lots of special abilities and secrets and other things like that. And all the players are fighting in this game to become the winner of the game, to become the grand leader of the empire here. And I just enjoy this game ever so much because it is a complete diceless based combat. It is a bit of a mind game because you're trying to figure out what the other players are doing based on the cards they could have, the cards they may have, or the cards that the other players have, and just watching their actions and how you're playing the game. This game is designed extremely well, and it does play all the way up to 5 players if you buy the expansion. The base game only plays up to 4. But this game also has the very unique advantage of being one of the very few dudes on map games that plays extremely well at exactly 2 players, which is not something you can say about any of these styles of games. That's Inish number 32. Rounding out the list and dropping from number 10 to 31 is Seven Wonders. Now, Seven Wonders is a game that has been around for a long time, and that might be part of the reason why it's dropped, but I don't think that's really it. I think it's just because there's been so many fantastic games that have come out lately, and I don't ever see Seven Wonders ever dropping completely off my list. Now, what is Seven Wonders? Seven Wonders is a card drafting game for 2 to 7 players is what it claims, but don't ever play this game with 2 players. If you ever want to play with 2 players, go buy the 2-player version of the game. This game actually plays best as a 3 to 7 player game, and this is the closest you are ever going to get to a Civilization playing game that plays this many players, has this much variety, and plays in this low of a playing time, which is just 3 combinations that makes this game so much fun. Basically, in Seven Wonders, at the start of every game, the player is going to start with an age 1 deck of cards, an age 2 deck of cards, and an age 3 deck of cards. At the start of every single round, players start with 7 cards. They're going to look at their hand of cards, pick one, and pass the rest of the cards to the left. And you're going to keep doing that until you only have 2 cards left. You're going to pick one of those cards, you're going to discard it, and the other one's going to be part of your empire, part of your great creation. You're going to do this over 3 rounds, and at the end of every single round, players are going to judge how powerful their armies are compared to their neighbors, and they're also going to play the game being able to share with the neighbors, and that is one of the really cool things about this game. This game manages to incorporate all the things that you would expect into an empire style building game, but it makes it a drafting game that can really easily play in under an hour, even with 7 players. If you take players who know how to play Seven Wonders, can look at their deck of cards, and figure out their strategies very quickly and know how the game plays, it is super easy to play a 7-player game with this in an hour. And I'm not talking about setup, and I'm not talking about throwing in all the expansions, because the game does have lots of expansions, and they do add a lot of variety to the game. Matter of fact, I would actually suggest not playing with all the expansions at the same time, because it kind of takes away one of the great things about the game. But if you're just talking about the basic game, with 7 players, you can easily get a 7-player game with this down in under an hour. And there's not anything you can say about any civilization building game. You're not going to play a 7-player civilization game that has this much of a civilization in under an hour. Now, the great thing about 7 Wonders is there are a lot of expansions for the game. Now, I highly, highly, highly recommend you get the Leaders expansion, and I actually play with this expansion every single time I play the game. Why? Because it adds a lot of theme to the game. There's also the 7 Wonders Babel expansion, which also is like a modular expansion. There's 2 things to it. You have the Babel Tower, and there's a separate expansion, and I would actually not include both of them at the same time. Again, going back to that prior comment I made, that you don't want to put in everything in this game, because you're adding to the playtime, you're taking away from one of the cool things about the game, and I think it plays best just picking 1 or 2 of the expansions and treating them as a module to create your gameplay experience. Now, 7 Wonders may have dropped from number 10 down to 31, but I really, again, don't think it's because it's a bad game, because it's not. This game is always going to be part of my collection. I enjoy it so immensely. It does everything a great drafting game should do, with a lot of potential to play with multiple different player accounts, a lot of variety, and a game that never seems samey every time you play, thanks to all the wonderful expansions and the different ways the game is going to play out every single time. That is number 31, 7 Wonders. I hope you enjoyed this part of the list, covering games number 40 all the way to number 31. In the next part of the list, we're going to have the top 30, the top 20, and the top 10, and you're going to see a lot less changes coming in with a lot less new games adding to the list. Matter of fact, in the top 30, there's 1 new game. In the top 20, there is 1 new game. And in the top 10, there's actually only 2 new games in the entire list, which is kind of interesting, showing how a lot of my tastes have actually stayed kind of the same, even though you're going to see a little bit of shuffling, a little bit of shaking in the top 10 on the list. Hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoyed this video series. If you have any comments or questions, make sure you leave them down in the YouTube comments down below. I'll be sure to answer them as quickly as I can. You can also feel free to email me at offtheshelfboardgamereviews. That's otsbgr@gmail.com. Also, click the notification button down below. It allows you to get notifications when the next videos in the series are uploaded. And as always, thanks for watching.